In the quiet, almost forgotten corners of a small Pennsylvanian town, where the streets whisper tales of the past, I find myself, a rookie cop, walking the beat under the watchful gaze of the moon. Night shifts have become my routine, a solitary patrol through the sleepy town, attending to the usual flurry of domestic disputes and the random oddities that come over the dispatch. But lately, there's been this peculiar repetition in my nightly routine. It all started last weekend. I'd initially shrugged it off as some kind of rookie hazing, a jest by the older officers, seasoned veterans who've walked these streets long enough to call them home. These men, many of them peers of my father, have seen it all, or so I thought. For privacy's sake, I'll leave out certain names and addresses. Here's how it all unfolded. It was a late Friday night, or early Saturday morning to be exact, when the radio crackled to life. "Dispatch to 1034, they called. "We've got a 911 hang-up from a landline at Patch Lane. Can you check it out?" Without hesitation, I was on my way, driving through the rural outskirts, the road stretching before me like a dark ribbon. Patch Lane was about a 6-mile drive, but in the still of the night, I made it in under 10 minutes. The lane was a gravel path, leading to an old farmhouse, shrouded in darkness. I parked my cruiser, lights off, to avoid drawing attention. We're trained for caution in these situations, where any light could signal an ambush. I approached the farmhouse, my steps as silent as the night itself. No signs of life, not even a parked car. It felt like I was stepping into a forgotten world. I radioed dispatch, doubting the address, but it was confirmed. 1034, that's the correct address. I knocked, announced myself, "Officer Berkeley Police Department." No response. The windows were shut tight, and a gentle push on the front door confirmed my suspicion. The house seemed abandoned. I radioed in again. "Looks like a false alarm. The house is deserted." With a few hours left in my shift, I headed to the local 24-hour gas station for a much-needed coffee break. There, I ran into two of my colleagues, who seemed all too interested in my visit to the old farmhouse. They started spinning this tale about the house's original owner, Dr. Wounds, a notorious figure from the 1800s, known for his questionable medical practices. I listened, half amused, half skeptical, as they recounted the grim history tied to the place. The next night, around the same time, dispatch called me again to the same house. Another 911 hang-up, but this time, there were muffled voices on the line. Despite my growing suspicion that this was some elaborate prank, I had to respond. I repeated the previous night's routine, parking away from the house, checking the perimeter, announcing myself. But this time, something was different. The door was unlocked. My hand instinctively went to my gun as I announced myself again. Before entering, I radioed in, asking for backup. "All units are busy," came the reply. It was just me and the silent, seemingly abandoned house. I entered, gun drawn, navigating through a landscape of cobwebs and decay. Upstairs, downstairs, even the basement, I searched every nook and cranny. In the basement, a metal door with a rusted padlock caught my attention. It was clear no one had been there for years. After leaving the house, I met another colleague at the gas station who shared his own experiences with the Patch Lane house. Back in the 90s, he often responded to calls from there when a family lived in the residence. Nothing ever seemed amiss, just a single mom and her 2 kids. He couldn't recall anything about a locked room in the basement, but the mention of it seemed to jog a distant memory. This series of events, each as mysterious as the last, has woven a strange tapestry in my nightly patrols. Each visit to the Patch Lane house reveals nothing but deepens the enigma. What secrets does that old farmhouse hold? And what about that locked room in the basement, untouched and unopened for decades? The story continues to unfold, each night adding a new layer to this small-town mystery. As the saga of the mysterious Patch Lane house continued, each visit seemed to peel back another layer of its enigmatic history. Reflecting on the past encounters, I remembered a conversation with a colleague about a family that once lived there. The mother, an attractive woman, had inquired about a locksmith for a locked room in the basement, a detail that seemed trivial at the time but now held a new significance. This time something was amiss. The front door stood wide open, a stark contrast to the previous night when I had ensured it was securely shut. My mind raced with possibilities. A homeless person seeking shelter, perhaps? I cautiously entered, calling out my presence. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of someone darting around a corner. My heart raced as I pursued, only to find the empty kitchen and the door to the basement. The basement was deserted, a ghostly silence filling the air. Frantically, I radioed for backup, but the line was dead. After a thorough search, I returned to my cruiser, out of breath and puzzled. The station finally responded, unaware of my earlier calls. I reported the situation and headed back, the mystery deepening with each visit. Tuesday and Wednesday offered a brief respite, a chance to gather my thoughts and question my own sanity. Was I imagining things? The encounters at Patch Lane were becoming increasingly bizarre, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Monday night's shift was uneventful until roll call, where the jokes about Patch Lane resumed. I firmly stated my intention to avoid any further calls to that house, but fate had other plans. My friend, who had previous encounters with the house in the 90s, received a dispatch to Patch Lane. Reluctantly, I joined him, curiosity and duty overriding my apprehension. We arrived together to find the front door once again wide open. Methodically, we cleared each room, the tension palpable. In the basement, a shocking discovery awaited us. The previously locked door was now ajar, the rusted padlock nowhere to be found. Hesitantly, we opened the door, only to be hit by a wave of decay and death. Inside, the bloated corpse of a young woman lay in silent testimony to the horrors hidden within these walls. The medical examiner's team arrived, their assessment chilling. The body had been there for 3 to 4 days, a timeline that defied logic and reason. I had been in that very room just a day before, the lock intact and the room seemingly untouched for years. Returning to work after a short break, I was summoned by Chief Fox. The frustration in his voice was palpable as he grilled me on my actions and decisions during the previous visits to the house. Despite following protocol and exercising due diligence, I found myself defending my actions, explaining the logic behind each decision. Chief Fox, unimpressed, warned me to be more vigilant, leaving me with a heavy load of follow-up work on the case. As I started my shift, the weight of the unresolved mysteries at Patch Lane hung over me, a reminder of the unpredictable and often inexplicable nature of police work in this small, seemingly quiet town. Dealing with Chief Fox's skepticism and the apparent negligence of the medical examiner's office, I felt like I was battling more than just the mysteries of Patch Lane. It was clear that the chief, influenced by the city council, harbored reservations about having another female officer on the force. Small-town politics and underlying sexism were hurdles I had grown accustomed to, but they never ceased to frustrate me. Determined to get to the bottom of the case, I decided to follow up with the medical examiner's office myself. Upon calling the chief medical examiner, his dismissive tone was evident, but I wasn't deterred. Arriving at the lab, I was greeted by a young assistant, fresh-faced and eager to help. I requested the autopsy report for the Patch Lane case. She handed me a meager 3-page document, which immediately struck me as insufficient for a homicide case that should have warranted a much more detailed examination. As I sat in the lab, poring over the report, discrepancies jumped out at me. The victim's hair color and eye color were incorrectly listed, and the cause of death was frustratingly marked as undetermined. My patience wearing thin, I confronted the chief medical examiner, holding up the sparse report. He defensively claimed it was complete, blaming me for the lack of evidence due to the body's prolonged enclosure. His attitude only fueled my determination. Insisting on seeing the body again, I was taken to the morgue. There, the sight of the victim's unmistakable blonde hair confirmed my suspicion. The report was flawed. Searching the body for any form of identification, I found a gas station receipt dated back to October 20th, 1998, with an inexplicably cheap gas price and a faint pencil-written note on the back. The more I observed, the more the victim's attire seemed oddly out of time, reminiscent of a past era. The chief medical examiner provided me with a stack of identification attempts, but even these were incomplete, with only 6 fingerprints recorded. His retort to my questioning was as dismissive as it was unhelpful. Undeterred, I fingerprinted all 10 of the victim's fingers and ran them through the Mobile Automated Fingerprint Identification System, AFIS. To my astonishment, I got a hit. Michelle Klein, born May 7, 1972, and supposedly deceased since October 20th, 1998. Friday evening found me grappling with the surreal developments of the case, resorting to a bottle of Merlot to ease the weight of the unsolvable. The fresh condition of the body, juxtaposed with a 20-year-old death date, defied explanation. My mind raced with theories as I prepared for another shift, determined to retest the fingerprints with a different AFIS device. After roll call, I seized the opportunity to use a newer AFIS. Despite the anticipation, the system frustratingly timed out. A second attempt yielded a "no results found" message, a common response for individuals without a criminal record, but puzzling in this context. I kept my findings to myself, wary of seeming unhinged in the eyes of my colleagues. Before I could delve deeper, an urgent call interrupted my thoughts. The blaring tone signaled a new emergency, snapping me back to the immediate demands of my duty. Racing to the scene with lights and sirens blaring, we searched tirelessly for over an hour, yet found nothing. The day's events, culminating in this fruitless pursuit, left me more perplexed and determined than ever to unravel the enigma of Patch Lane and the mysterious case of Michelle Klein. The aftermath of my encounter with Chief Fox left a bitter taste in my mouth. His attitude, coupled with the complexities of small-town politics, made my investigation into the Patch Lane case even more challenging. But my resolve was firm. I was determined to find answers. Saturday rolled around, and I decided to revisit Patch Lane, hoping to find some closure. Knowing it was better not to go alone, I texted Tim, badge number 1045, who had accompanied me last time. We devised a cover story about patrolling a local park, a common hotspot for underage drinking and smoking. As we arrived at Patch Lane, the weight of our previous discoveries hung heavy in the air. Tim, nursing a bad back, slowly exited the cruiser. I was determined to conduct a thorough sweep of the perimeter, suspecting that the medical examiner's office might not have processed the scene correctly. Despite the police tape and the stark "Do Not Enter" sign across the front door, I ventured closer, only to be startled by a shrill scream. It turned out to be a black cat, which, after a moment of surprise, began to purr and wrap itself around my legs. The cat, which I had whimsically named Haley, seemed agitated as we neared the rear of the house. Her frantic meows and the shadow I noticed in an upper-level window made me uneasy. As I took a few steps back for a better look, a sharp pain struck my ankle. It was an old, rusted handle from a root cellar door, a common feature in these old farmhouses. Curiosity piqued, Tim and I decided to explore the root cellar. I led the way, using my ASP baton to clear the spider webs. The cellar led to a small set of stairs and a hatch, reminiscent of an attic door. As I opened the hatch and peered inside, I realized it was the same room where we had found Jane Doe. We carefully retraced our steps, mindful not to disturb the active crime scene. Back in our cruisers, we took a moment to calm our nerves, despite neither of us being smokers. The events at Patch Lane were taking a toll. Sunday at work was different. The station was abuzz about some federal agents in Chief Fox's office. Sergeant Oakley quickly beckoned me to the chief's office. The U.S. Marshal's involvement in the case was unexpected, and it set my mind racing with possibilities. Were they here because of a fugitive? Did they think our Jane Doe was involved? Inside the chief's office, the marshals questioned me about the events at Patch Lane. They revealed that Jane Doe, Michelle Klein, had been in the Witness Protection Program, a key witness in a high-profile case involving the ATF years ago. Her death had been faked upon entering the program. Running her fingerprints had triggered an alert in their system, which is how they ended up in our small town. As quickly as they arrived, the marshals left, leaving me with more questions than answers. Who killed Michelle Klein? Why the repeated 911 calls? Why was there a 20-year-old receipt in her pocket? I spent the rest of my shift filling out paperwork for the federal agents, my mind spinning with theories and questions. Exhausted, I returned home early Monday morning, my thoughts still swirling around the mysterious case of Michelle Klein. The complexities of the case, now entangled with federal interests, left me wondering about the secrets that Patch Lane still held. 2 glasses of wine helped ease my mind before I finally succumbed to sleep, the echoes of the case lingering in my dreams. Monday evening found me fighting off exhaustion as I headed back to the station for roll call, which started at 5 in the evening. Sergeant Oakley briefed us on the events of the previous shift before we were dispatched to our respective duties. My first call of the evening was from an elderly woman, oxygen-dependent, and in need of company until her phone lines were repaired. As I drove to her location, I couldn't help but glance towards Patch Lane, the site of the ongoing mystery that occupied my thoughts. Arriving at the scene, I met a sweet old lady who reminded me of my own grandmother. She had managed to walk to her neighbor's house to call for help, and while the phone company was already on its way, she simply wanted an officer to keep her company. Her farmhouse, adorned with a colorful garden and quaint lawn ornaments, exuded a warmth and nostalgia that was comforting. To my surprise, the local phone company technician Tom arrived swiftly. As I watched him work on the outdoor phone box, I was intrigued by the technology he described. These boxes connected multiple phone lines and could be used to test connections. A loose wire in the box sparked a realization in me. Could these boxes be the source of the mysterious 911 hang-ups from Patch Lane? Tom confirmed that it was indeed possible for someone to use these boxes to make calls, including to 911. This new information was a potential breakthrough in the case. After ensuring the elderly lady's phone service was restored, I decided to use the remaining daylight to investigate the phone box near Patch Lane. Upon finding the box in a field near the farmhouse, I noticed it had been opened recently, a stark contrast to the one I saw Tom struggle to open. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a pained cry from the porch. It was Haley, the black cat, her paw swollen and in obvious distress. As an animal lover, I couldn't leave her there, so I wrapped her in an old uniform shirt and took her to my family's old veterinarian, Dr. Domier. Dr. Domier, still practicing in his 80s, was a town staple, known by everyone. As he treated Haley, we chatted about Patch Lane. He recalled the farm's history and mentioned a previous owner rumored to be involved in illegal activities and possibly connected to the mafia. This new piece of the puzzle was intriguing and added another layer to the already complex case of Patch Lane. After receiving instructions to administer penicillin to Haley for the next few days, I realized I had inadvertently adopted a cat. Despite being more of a dog person, I couldn't bear the thought of abandoning her. On my way home, I stopped to pick up supplies for Haley, a litter box, cat litter, and food. The day's events, from the elderly lady's phone troubles to the discovery of the recently accessed phonobox near Patch Lane and now caring for Haley, added more dimensions to the ongoing investigation. Each piece of information seemed to lead to more questions, deepening the mystery that surrounded Patch Lane and its shadowy past. Tuesday morning, despite it being my day off, I was up early. Feeling a newfound sense of companionship, I fed Haley, who had quickly nestled her way into my heart. I was determined to dig deeper into the Patch Lane mystery and had a hunch that my dad, a long-serving officer, might hold some key insights. Arriving at his house, I was reminded of my mom by the blooming rosa bush she had planted, a lingering presence in the tranquility of Dad's yard. After a hearty meal and some of his super-secret recipe coffee, I broached the subject of Patch Lane. To my surprise, Dad had been there years ago, assisting the ATF in a raid that targeted illegal gun smuggling. The owner, a certain Joseph Miller, or a similar name, had somehow been tipped off and escaped. The whole operation was kept under wraps, never making it to the media. This revelation made me question why Tim, my colleague, had never mentioned any of this. But Dad explained that Tim had joined the department after these events. Feeling slightly relieved that I hadn't been kept in the dark deliberately, I shared only a bit about my recent visits to Patch Lane with my dad before hastily leaving, using Haley as my excuse. I called the state lab for an update on the mysterious writing on the receipt found in Michelle's pocket. The lab had deciphered it as L34, R16, L8, seemingly a combination to a safe. This new clue suggested there might be a hidden safe at Patch Lane, possibly holding vital information. Later, as I pulled up to my dad's house, I noticed Tim's truck in the driveway. They often caught up over cigars on their days off. Eager to discuss the recent developments, I joined them. The conversation soon turned to Patch Lane. Tim reminisced about responding to 911 hang-ups at the house, recalling a young tenant with 2 small children. She always seemed relieved to see the police, expressing uneasiness about being watched in the large house. Tim couldn't remember her name, which led me to ask whether she could be the same woman we found in the basement. Dad, hesitantly, added to the conversation, noting that most tenants at Patch Lane were young, attractive women, often from out of town. This pattern was unusual and, admittedly, a bit unsettling. With this new information and the potential lead on a safe, I convinced Tim to return to Patch Lane with me. Despite it being our day off, we decided to go into the station to work overtime. The possibility of uncovering more about Michelle Klein and the mysterious house's history was too compelling to ignore. The day was shaping up to be a crucial one in unraveling the deepening mystery of Patch Lane. On my day off, I decided to take a proactive approach to the Patch Lane case. Remembering that Tim used to find old coins at the beach with his metal detector, I asked him to bring it along to help you search for the safe at Patch Lane. After roll call, we headed straight to the house. The crime scene was no longer active, so we started our search in the master bedroom, methodically checking each floorboard for any sign of a hidden safe. Unfortunately, our search there yielded nothing. Moving to the basement, we entered the room where we had found Michelle's body. The sight was one I knew I'd never forget. Her swollen purple body, barely recognizable as human. Tim ran his metal detector along the walls. When it beeped, we both paused, then began to feel along the wall. Pushing a block, we revealed a hidden safe, exactly matching the combination I had deciphered from the receipt. As I prepared to open the safe, a chilling sound stopped me, the cocking of a revolver. Turning around, I was met with the barrel of a gun and the piercing blue eyes of Joseph, the owner of the house. His aggressive stance and words indicated he was ready to kill. I took a calculated risk, lunging forward and grabbing the gun, disarming him in a swift motion. Tim quickly handcuffed him while I called for backup. The suits, federal agents I had encountered earlier in the week, arrived at the scene. Once Joseph was secured, I finally opened the safe to find photographs, including one of Michelle Klein. The suits began to explain that Joseph Mahler was involved in illegal gun trade and used the house and its tenants as a cover. They detailed how Michelle, having discovered his operations, contacted the ATF, leading to her entry into witness protection. They revealed that Michelle's sudden return was spurred by her son's diagnosis of cancer. She wanted to show him the photographs in the safe to prove her identity. Joseph, seeing her at the house, likely killed her to silence the only witness against him. The suits, however, remained tight-lipped about who made the 911 hang-up calls, hinting at a good Samaritan with an eye for justice. Back at the station, I shared my suspicions about the medical examiner's involvement in the case. However, the ME himself arrived, apologizing for his actions. He explained he had received threats against his family, forcing him to compromise the investigation. Just as I was processing all this, dispatch called me to another 911 hang-up. The endless cycle of duty continued, But with the Patch Lane case seemingly coming to a close, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The mystery that had consumed me for so long was finally unraveling, revealing a tangled web of crime, cover-ups, and courage in the face of danger.